Thank you, and a warm welcome from Oxford. Although I have to confess, this isn't actually where I am, but you can probably tell that. But I am virtually. And thank you for your time on behalf of the whole of the GCSEC team. I suggest we go to the next slide. Thanks, Ava. So we're actually, believe it or not, 5 years on since the last edition of the CMM, which is the 2016 edition. Much has been learnt, and we should start off by thanking all of those involved. So our partners at OAS, the World Bank, ITU, CTO, the Constellation partners, OCSC and C3SA, all of the sponsors of the research, the application of the research, and also primarily the countries that are now using the model. As you can see from this map, to date, over 85 different countries are now using the CMM to benchmark their current national capacity. And we're well aware of a number of countries that are now engaged in second reviews, so they can gather evidence on the progress that's being made. You will be able to access more of these details on the website. Next slide, please, Ava. As it happens, one of our sponsors commissioned an external independent review of the benefits of the CMM and its use. And interestingly, we've summarized them here. What we would say is this: when we started out on this journey with all of you, the intention was to really develop a framework, a methodology for really understanding what it means to have capacity, what areas of capacity the nation needs to have to address its concerns, and also how one can do better and make sensible decisions about investments in capacity building projects. What we hadn't anticipated at the time of its inception was the actual value that just conducting a CMM review can have. And this is not just solely in terms of helping to network and build collaboration across the stakeholders that are involved, because as you all know, conducting a CMM review is inherently a multi-stakeholder process. But let's not underestimate the value of building those kinds of relationships and develop a common understanding between each other of the different dimensions of capacity and just how important and interdependent they all are on our ultimate success. This model is broad. We understand that this breadth is incredibly important. So conducting a cybersecurity capacity review using it builds the awareness, builds the appreciation for the breadth and the depth of these dimensions and the various factors that contribute towards them. It can help drive greater collaboration across these stakeholders, but also within the governments that are looking after the interests of the nation, that are charged with governing their nation. It can help identify the essential roles and the responsibilities that go alongside them. It can help identify the stakeholders that will be incredibly important to delivering effective cybersecurity functionality as you perform these roles. And ultimately, conducting one of these reviews, being able to benchmark your current state of capacity can provide the kinds of evidence and the rationale for building business cases, cases for funding for further investment. And as such, we know now through its application and its use around the world that it has helped to indeed increase funding for essential capacity building activities and is becoming foundational to developing national strategies and setting policy. So we should all be very proud as a community of what is being achieved. But naturally, the world is a changing place, and it's incredibly important to make sure that these kinds of benchmarks and models remain relevant. So could we move to the next slide? So what was the decision process that sits beneath a review of the CMM in the creation of this edition? Well, there's two key factors. Forgive us for rather overusing the term factors as we move through this presentation. Let's call them, I would say, aspects, but that will be a very well used concept too. There's two key issues really at the heart of this process, or the decision to follow it. One is we exist in a changing environment, and there's various facets to how those changes might cause us to reflect upon, do we need to review the model and check that it still is delivering what it needs to do in terms of benchmarking? Of course, technology changes all the time. What's important about that, of course, is the way in which we're using the technology is changing. And that can introduce new vulnerabilities that could be attacked. It can also change what we want to achieve in cyberspace. We now see technology underpinning the delivery of democracy in parts of the world in terms of voting systems. We see technology being at the core of future manufacturing, Industry 4.0, and for some countries, that might be at the core of their economic strategies. It's changing in its use inside our critical infrastructures, and that can be a concern because we need those to have appropriate integrity and to be reliable and to be resilient in the face of ultimately what is also a fast changing threat environment that we all exist in. So it's important periodically to take stock of our changing needs, the harms that we're facing, and what our strategic objectives are for societies and our economies, and just to make sure that these models remain covering all of those issues, that they're going to put us in the best position for understanding what it is we need to achieve in terms of capacity. So that's the first point. And then the second point, of course, is there is a changing environment in terms of the risk controls that we use. We understand over time more and more what good practice looks like. What are the important risk controls? What are the new ones or the nuances and the changes to risk controls? What do we know to be the best or good practice in addressing cybersecurity? And it's important to recognize that knowledge as it develops in application, and to make sure that the CMM correctly reflects what we know to be the very best in terms of knowledge and good practice. And so it's those two key factors that sit beneath a decision to reflect upon whether we need to evolve the model. And of course, what we do then is also benefit from the evidence and the experience of applying it in the field in the last 5 years. And that brought us to a point where we felt now was a good time to consider a revision. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Ava, who's going to just tell you a bit more about how that revision process was conducted, the methods followed. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Sadie, for the opening remarks. And now I'm going to talk about a little bit in more detail the CMM revision process and how it started formally in 2019. We collected evidence from our CMM implementers, from our global constellation partners, including the Oceania Cybersecurity Center, the Cyber Capacities Center in Southern Africa, those countries who use the CMM, and we extensively consulted with our expert advisory panels and a variety of cybersecurity experts. And the consultations started in autumn 2019, where we proposed change proposals for each dimension. And we sent out almost 300 personalized email invitations to our EAP members, global constellation members, partners, and strategic and regional partners, and cybersecurity experts. And we organized in total 18 online conference calls alongside one-on-one calls with the partners and other experts to discuss the content of the change proposals. And once we've gathered all the feedback, we presented these changes and validated during the CMM revision workshop held in Melbourne alongside the OCSCC GCSCC annual conference in Melbourne, February 2020. Altogether, more than 150 individuals contributed to the different steps of the revision process, and we are very grateful for their contribution, and we would like to thank all of them. And the question is, what was included in the proposed CMM 2021 edition? And there were certain criteria that had to be met in order to include it in the 2021 edition. So the first criteria was that each change must have been proposed by the partners, users, or expert advisors, and it must be based on experience in deploying the CMM and the feedback from a country which has used the CMM, or from a member of the international stakeholder community who has a particular insight into the changing environments that needs to be taken into account. The second criteria was that the change must have been discussed with our expert advisory panel, the regional, strategic, and implementation partners and other experts during online conference calls, and also one-to-one online meetings, and to make sure that a clear consensus has been reached among the attendees. The next criteria was that the change must have been discussed at the CMM revision workshop in February 2020 in Melbourne, and also make sure that a clear consensus must have been reached among the attendees. Also, global consultation partners and strategic and implementation partners must have been consulted regarding those changes, and also make sure that our GCSCC technical board is in agreement that those changes are desirable to make. And as you can see on this slide, all the five main areas remain the same. And we just made some minor changes regarding the indicators. We now have 800 indicators included in the model, but all the other aspects and elements of the CMM model remain the same. And these are the 5 stages of maturity that we used in the CMM reviews for the country to benchmark its cybersecurity maturity. This is also remained the same from startup to dynamic. And now I would like to give the floor to the chairs, the dimension chairs, who are going to discuss the dimension. The first dimension is cybersecurity policy and strategy, and I would like to give the floor to Jamie. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eva. I'm Jamie Saunders. I'm a visiting fellow at the Oxford Martin School, and I chair Dimension 1 of the CMM. I'm afraid you'll have me twice because I'm also going to speak to Dimension 4 on Federico's behalf, who couldn't make it today. I wanted to just give an overview of the dimension to those of you who are less familiar, and then I shall explain some of the significant changes from the last edition. There's someone breaking concrete outside my window. I hope that isn't too disturbing. Someone wave. Eva, let me know if it's getting too noisy and I'll move. So Dimension 1, cybersecurity policy and strategy, focuses on the building of a national strategy and the delivery of a cybersecurity program. And then it covers 3 particularly important elements that you'd expect to see in any national program. So 1.1, the strategy itself, how is it being developed? What does it contain? How is it being implemented? How is it being reviewed? And a new factor, a new aspect I'll come on to, international engagement, in a minute. We then focus on incident response and crisis management. How are incidents identified? How is the response organized? And how does cyber incidents get integrated into the overall national crisis management system, which of course will look beyond cyber? Critical national infrastructure protection. How is the CNI identified and defined in the country? what are the operational practices which are undertaken by the individual critical infrastructure owners, and what is the role of the regulator, or I should say regulators, and in particular sector-specific regulators. And then finally in this dimension, we look at the defence and national security community of a country. Often they play an extremely important role, but it's important to understand what is that role, what are their own requirements in terms of national security and defence, and how do they interact with the civil authorities, hence the aspect on civil defence coordination. Now, I hope that all of that is familiar to people who have used the CMM in the past, but there are some changes I just want to emphasize. The first is in D1.1, where we've placed more emphasis on risk assessment as part of the strategy build process. And this is because it's clearly important that a national strategy is based on the specific circumstances and risks that a particular country faces. So we wanted to see more evidence that a process had been gone through to do that. The second major change here is much more focus on implementation and review, including such issues as budgeting, benefits monitoring, and recognizing that there's often an important role to be played by subnational bodies as well as national bodies, and is that fully understood? Then we've also included, by popular demand, a new aspect here on international engagement. And this was it recognizing that national policy is not developed in isolation, that there are several debates going on in the international community about cybersecurity, about broader internet governance, cyber issues. And it's important that countries understand what the debates are, understand what stake they have in the debates, and find ways to participate and contribute to those debates in a way that's appropriate to their size and their particular interests. So we have a brand new aspect looking at that. You'll see in this second factor, what we've done here is to actually fuse an old factor on crisis management and the one on incident response. And that was simply to make it clearer that we're interested both in the incident response processes, but also the extent to which the national crisis management processes are taking sufficient account of the particular scenarios that one might see in a cyber incident. Next slide, please. The critical national infrastructure, the main change here, and I'll come back to this in dimension 4, is that the role of regulators, both cross-cutting regulators and sector-specific regulators, has been given much greater emphasis across the world since the CMM was first released. So we've made more of what their role is, and in particular, how cybersecurity is embedded into regulatory requirements. I've discussed crisis management already. The cyber defense changes aren't particularly significant. Really, the aspects have been reorganized and the language has been clarified, I hope, to make it clear that we're talking here about cybersecurity within the defense and national security community, or you could say capital D defense, rather than cyber defense as an alternative term for network defense, which of course is something which individual organizations do. So this is about national security and defense in the military sense, rather than defense in the narrower cybersecurity definition. So we hope that that is clearer. And finally, there was a factor on communications redundancy that, in discussion with Professor Michael, we agreed would sit better in dimension 5, but elements of this have been included in crisis management when it refers to the resilience of the crisis management communications themselves. In other words, will they be able to operate in a contested cyber scenario? And that summarizes Dimension 1 and the changes that have been made in this current edition. Thank you, Eva.
Thanks very much, Jamie, for presenting Dimension 1. And now I would like to move to the next dimension, Dimension 2, which will be presented by the Dimension Chair, Bill, Cybersecurity Culture and Society. Bill, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Eva, and thanks to everyone who's contributed to our rethinking of the Dimension 2, which is cybersecurity, culture, and society. We haven't made any dramatic changes. We mainly reinforced the value of what we had done previously, but we have made some really important additions, and I'll speak primarily to those. And again, we'll have, hopefully at the end of the session, we can address any questions you have I haven't covered. Obviously, this dimension relates to one of the most major aspects of cybersecurity, because we're talking about now 4.66 billion users. And how do we characterize their attitudes, values, and practices, what we call their cybersecurity culture and society, in ways that capture the basic elements of importance to changing perspectives on cybersecurity. The 5 dimensions are exactly the same. The mindset, how people think about, how they perceive cybersecurity, to what degree is it embedded as a routine habit in their normal behavior. Their trust and confidence in online services, the degree to which they understand and value personal information protection online, and also the reporting, that is what degree social media, for example, is a value in reporting and discussing issues of cybersecurity among the public. That is, for example, whether social media treat whistleblowing as a potentially positive contribution, but always look critically at aspects of how people use the internet. And also media and online platforms. We didn't even use the term platform in this area last time, but the platformization of the internet has been one of the most important developments in recent years. And so we talk more specifically about platforms. If we could go to the changes, I'll try to focus on the specific changes that we've made. With respect to the cybersecurity mindset, there has been no real substantive change. There's been a reordering so that we aggregate all of our indicators around levels of awareness, the priority of security, and the practices of users. So we don't, rather than aggregate by government, private sector users, we look at awareness within those 3 sectors. And so it's a more coherent way, and we've tried to make that comparable across all the various dimensions as well. Trust and confidence in online services, perhaps that's where we've made the most changes, even though they haven't been that dramatic, but they are very significant. We've added digital literacy and skills, which is tremendously important. We've always looked at trust and confidence and search and information online, but do people know how to use search, and do they have other skills that are critical for them protecting themselves online? So we've added a whole section on digital literacy and skills. We've moved the discussion of trust and confidence in the internet to a more specific focus on online search and information. Almost everyone that uses the internet goes if they need to know anything, the first place most people go is online. And so they mainly, when they go online, they mainly go to some search engine. So to what degree do they trust search, and do they trust the information they can find online? And of course, related to that is this rising concern over disinformation, which is sometimes blamed for polarization across the world and in certain countries, but there's nothing new about disinformation or misinformation online. That's always been an issue with the internet, but it is rising as a more important issue that has potentially greater consequences in a networked world with over 60% of people online. So are each nation doing something in relation to disinformation? We have no clear light bulb moment where we say, this is exactly how you tackle disinformation. But we ask if in each country, do they have some initiatives and programs developed to tackle concerns over disinformation in their country. The other in personal information and understanding, there's the main things we've done is we've refined some of the standards and policies developed in each country, but we haven't, otherwise the focus remains the same. And if you go to the next slide, Eva, we've added the concerns that are discussed online and some additional concern over what metrics are collected with respect to reporting mechanisms. And on the last, in terms of media and social media, again, we want to know, do the media and do social media talk about cybersecurity? In many countries, we found that there's almost no discussion of cybersecurity in the media. And of course, you know, the best way of ever getting a message across to the public is if it's embedded in sitcoms that people watch every day, or that the media treat it as a serious issue. So there's a real question there about whether the media are capable of and willing to help develop an awareness of cybersecurity issues and practices. And those are the issues, but again, we're going to have time for questions, I hope, and I'm happy to address any question in this dimension. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill, for presenting Dimension 2. And now we are moving to the next dimension, Dimension 3, building cybersecurity knowledge and capacities, that will be presented by Bazi. Bazi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eva. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending the session, and thank you very much to everybody that was part in the whole review process, as Eva has described, which took in excess of 1 year. If you look at Dimension 3, the whole purpose of Dimension 3 is to evaluate or assess the whole aspect of cybersecurity awareness, cybersecurity education, cybersecurity professional training, and then cybersecurity research. The whole research aspect I'll come back to just now. That was a new factor which was added in the new version. But if we go, let's take the factors one by one. The first one is the matter of cybersecurity awareness. It is well known all over the world and well reported that cybersecurity awareness is an essential part in any country, and that it's in most national cybersecurity strategies, the aspect of cybersecurity awareness, cybersecurity education, and cybersecurity professional skills are noted as an important part of the strategy of that country as such. So if we start with the first dimension, namely that of cybersecurity awareness, we made some changes there. Eva, if you can have the first slide, please. In the previous version, we evaluated cybersecurity awareness according to the factor awareness raising. We changed the name in the new version to building cybersecurity awareness. Where in the previous version, we just had one aspect, in other words, called awareness raising programs. The consensus discussion among all the stakeholders involved was that that should now become a little more detailed. The aspect of awareness is so important, cybersecurity awareness, that one should start looking a little bit wider than just a general awareness raising program. So what we've done there, we added the new aspects, namely the initiatives by the government in terms of cybersecurity awareness raising, initiatives by the private sector in terms of cybersecurity awareness raising, and then initiatives by the civil society. And each one of those will then, in the new version, be evaluated independently to get the inputs and the progress in that specific category of awareness raising. The matter of executive awareness raising has always been part of the model, and that is growing more important, and some fine changes were made in the indicators to more emphasize the fact that executive awareness raising is becoming more and more important because it's basically a core element of corporate governance in any company. The second factor is that of education. It was called Framework for Education. In line now, we call it Cybersecurity Education. And basically, the aspects are the same. We look at the provision of cybersecurity education in the country in terms of school level, formal school level syllabi, curricula, and also at universities, at the integration of cybersecurity modules in degree courses and the availability of specialized cybersecurity degrees in the country. And then the administration in terms of the availability of the courses, the availability of sufficient lecturers, etc., etc. The third factor was also one in the old version. It was called Framework for Professional Training, and it's called Cybersecurity Professional Training in the new version. That stays very much the same. That's a very important aspect that was highly stressed again by the participants and the stakeholders, that the need for certified professionals in the country is growing. So nothing much has changed as far as that is concerned. The new factor that was added, as you can see there, is factor 3.4, namely cybersecurity research and innovation. There was again a consensus feeling that a country, as it matures in its cybersecurity capacity status, it should start looking at doing some basic research and then growing in that research output, and also concentrate on the aspect of innovation, which are to the benefit of that specific country. It's still very new, and I think we will have to see how this develops, but it was strongly supported so far when we shared the new model so far. So as far as cybersecurity dimension 3 is concerned, very much the same, very much the core of it is the whole education, awareness, professional training, and now research. And that is core, as also many of the national cybersecurity strategies support that. And it's important also that the link between dimension 3, if we want to call it the link, and for example, dimension 3 is the fact that in most of these, if not all of these factors, we actually investigate how the specific aspect of cybersecurity awareness, for example, or cybersecurity education or professional training or even research is linked to the national cybersecurity strategy. Is it noted there, and is it emphasized in that national strategy? That's basically where we stand. And thank you very much again to everybody who helped bring us where we are now. Thank you very much, Eva.
Thanks very much, Bazi, for presenting Dimension 3. And now we're moving to the next time, legal and regulatory frameworks that will be presented by Jamie. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eva. And as I say, Federico sends his apologies for today. So this dimension 4, legal and regulatory frameworks. Again, just a quick overview for those who are less familiar with this. So we're looking at the actual laws themselves, both in terms of substantive and procedural cybercrime legislation. I'll talk about human rights in a moment. We're then looking at other areas of regulation and legislation that, whilst not specific to cyber, have very strong overlaps to cyber. And the key issue there, the key question there, is the extent to which these related legislations and regulations take proper account of the way that cyberspace is changing the context within which these regulations and laws work. We look at the actual capability and capacity of the primary organizations that are involved in the judicial process. And then we look at the extent of cooperation, formal and informal, between the judiciary, law enforcement, but also government and industry. As I said, under Dimension 1, perhaps the most significant change here is a much, much greater emphasis on the role that regulatory authorities have, both in mandating standards, but also in enforcing those regulatory standards. Because often, although they are not law enforcement, regulatory enforcement plays a key role in raising cybersecurity standards across a country. So we've made that much clearer, and as I said before, looking both at cross-cutting regulators and sector-specific regulators who have proven to have an increasingly important role. The second big change here is around human rights impact assessment. Now, human rights has always been an integral part of this model, but we felt it needed even greater emphasis, and focusing very much on what is the CMM looking at, because the CMM as such is not there to evaluate the human rights performance of a country, but it is there to ensure that the interventions that are being taken in the name of cybersecurity are subject to proper human rights impact assessment, and that that is verified, there's independent verification that the obligations, the human rights obligations that the country has made are being respected within the strategy and the policy. D4.2, that is actually a new factor, but all we've done here is to lift those specific items out of the old D4.1. And the reason that we've done that is because it's hard to, there may be new categories of law and regulation that come along. This is a snapshot, if you like, of the things which are most closely connected to cybersecurity, but that could change over time. And for example, in the whole area of artificial intelligence and whether there'll be more regulation in terms of artificial intelligence, which isn't cybersecurity per se, but there's clearly some very important overlaps. So we hope that that gives some flexibility and will help with forward compatibility issues, because we're not kind of mixing the core D4.1 issues with the D4.2 issues. And then the final change to mention is on D4.4. The content of this is as pretty much as it was before, but previously the two aspects we had were informal cooperation and formal cooperation. But talking to many of you in the review process, we felt, well, that's not actually the important distinction. It's much more important to look at the various types of cooperation, and whether that's formal or informal is going to be very context dependent and on the culture, the size of the country concerned. So better to look at it with this, if you like, this vertical cut rather than a horizontal cut of what's the informal, what's the formal. And those are the main changes which we've made to D4. So I'll hand back to Eva. Yeah, we've done these slides.
Thanks very much, Jamie, for presenting Dimension 4. And we are moving to the next dimension, standards and technologies. And I will give the floor to Michael. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dimension 5 has always been a sort of catch-all for the things that aren't anywhere else. It's the most technical dimension, but it's also still quite procedural in its outlook. It's not asking where can we prod a country to make it fall over. It's questioning whether the right thought processes have been gone through in setting up the various technical aspects. And there is a lot of emphasis on standards and the like. We'll go through how the aspects have changed in the next few slides, but there is actually probably the more substantial change is below the level of the aspect, which is particularly in the marketplace factor. It became apparent, particularly when we started dealing with some of the small island nations and the like, that penalizing you for not having your own cybersecurity industry was probably unreasonable. So rather than saying you must grow everything at home, we say you must be a smart customer if you rely on your neighbors. And so that's probably the most substantial difference. If we go back that slide, please. We've broadened things out from just looking at products and software to looking at products and services in general. In Factor 5.2, we have granted asylum to the refugees from D1.2 that Jamie mentioned. And so there are rather more indicators in the infrastructure resilience part. And something that became from popular demand is that if you're worried about reliability of the internet, you better be watching what's unreliable about it, and monitoring and response is an important thing. Software quality has had and assurance added to it, mostly to emphasize the importance of the whole life cycle in this sort of area. Next, please. The next two are just a restructuring, though there are some minor detail changes in the technological security controls. Perhaps the most lively debate at the Melbourne workshop on this was whether it should be technical or technological, and technological won. But it used to be that we pulled out cryptographic controls as a separate factor, and a lot of people argued that that was giving undue weight to cryptography. So they are now pulled in as an aspect within the general security control factor. The market space, again, is broadened out to include services and consultancy and things like that, but also looking at the security implications of outsourcing, reliance on the cloud and so on, whether there is smart thinking going on there. So the smart customer issues are underlying that, and they are probably, or while invisible in the aspect level view, they're probably the most fundamental change in between the 2016 and the 2021 version. And I think they are a significant improvement. Responsible disclosure, we are following the GFCE initiatives on responsible disclosure and bringing out more explicitly that we, as a global community, think that having legislation that allows you to penalize whistleblowers who are trying to do the right thing, shutting down the security research field and so on, is not good, and so there are rewards for having legal protections for good behaviour. And that, I think, concludes Dimension 5, and so the detailed view of the new version. We'll be happy to take questions at the end, but in the meantime, I'll hand you back to Eva.
Thanks very much, Michael, for presenting Dimension 5. And as Michael mentioned, the CMM 2021 edition will be available on our website, gcscc.ox.ac.uk. So I would encourage everyone to please feel free to check it out. And
Eva, one comment, sorry. Because there's so much demand and interest in the model and in the slides, but we can't rely on our website today. I will put both documents, the CMM document and the slides from today, into the chat for those, so those can download from there. For those who are participating from a mobile phone or can't download right now, that you can access the document in the upcoming days on our website when that one is restored. All right, back to you, Eva. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Caroline. And I just wanted to say a big thank you for all the individuals who contributed to the CMM revision process, and we are very grateful to all of them. And now we came to the end, or towards the end of our session, the Q&A session, and together with my colleague Caroline, we are going to moderate this part. And Caroline will help those participants who would like to speak up and ask questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to look at the chat function and look at the questions that were addressed in writing. So I'm gonna stop sharing.
Are there any questions at this point? You can either address it in the chat, or you can open your mic and if you want, your camera.
You want us to raise hands?
Yes. Patrick, please.
Thank you very much. That's all been very interesting and helpful. I'm involved very much also in the counter-fraud world internationally, and we've seen a huge rise in government activities on regulation and new measures to introduce tougher requirements to address the multi-trillion-dollar flows in cybercrime. And this is directly related. There's a much discussion about the interrelationship, not only with cybersecurity, but also with criminal investigations. And I just wondered if you could comment about this triangularity, if you like, between cybercrime, cybersecurity, and counter-fraud. Because I believe that there should be a counter-fraud framework sitting alongside what's happening here. I think there's a lot of crossover.
Who would like to answer this question? I'm gonna take 3 questions at a time, so we, if that's okay, then we
Sure.
can answer. David Mopeng, can you please open your mic and ask your question?
Hello. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the presentation. My name is David Mopeng from Botswana. I run a non-governmental organization that promotes digital literacy and cybersecurity awareness. And I just wanted to find out what has been your findings in terms of the level of commitment and will from different countries, particularly in Africa, when it comes to issues around cybersecurity awareness. We have realized that despite the fact that there's cyber laws in place, and there has been a lot of focus on making sure that different African societies become part of the broader digital space, there's very little in terms of what is being done to prepare people to be meaningful partakers in the digital space around the world. Hence digital literacy is very low. Issues around cybersecurity, there's not much effort going into making sure that people are taught and prepared to use these tools safely and meaningfully.
Thank you, David. Who would like to take Patrick's questions for Jamie? You would like to take that? I think David's question was probably for Bazi. So I would give Jamie the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I mean, what you're describing is a Venn diagram, of course, as I know you know. Cybercrime is definitely broader in scope than cybersecurity and vice versa. And of course, fraud is broader than cyber, but these are much more closely connected. To me, the absolute key here is, in terms of fraud, is that these sorts of processes and measures that exist for fraud take full and proper account of the way that cyberspace has changed both the risk profile and the way that criminals act and so on. So mainstreaming cyber within fraud, or indeed many other security or law enforcement processes, is I think the key. In a practical way, I think that means more coordination and in some cases fusion between the different authorities that are involved in these different things. So certainly one of the things which we're looking at in the CMM across several of the dimensions is the extent to which the different components of government and law enforcement are coordinating, and the sense to which the non-cyber specialist is getting up to speed with cyber issues. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's my reflection.
Yes, thank you, Jamie.
Sorry, I was fighting to get the mic, the button. Jamie, thank you very much for that. Might I ask that we could take this offline, because I think there are some pressing dimensions to this, and I would wish to explore what you've just said a little further, if that's possible.
Sure, I'll send you my email in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bazi, would you like to take David's question?
Thank you, Eva. David, thank you very much for the question coming from a neighboring country from where I am. I think it's an important question in Africa, and be assured that that is being worked on. You're probably aware of the creation of the Cybersecurity Capacity Center of Southern Africa, which was established a year or so ago in South Africa, but it's got a scope for the whole of Africa. And the purpose of that center is to actually advance precisely what you're saying. And there are some interesting indications already. One of the few countries so far that did a re-review or a reassessment under the CMM is an African country. And it became clear that there was an improvement in terms of aspects like cybersecurity and cybersecurity awareness and even cybersecurity education. So there definitely is a movement to be more cyber aware, to create more cybersecurity capacity. It is a problem. The center in Cape Town, the Southern African Cybersecurity Capacity Center, is working, and some research projects are coming out of there. There's also some projects that are envisaged in terms of the SADC area and even the African Union. But to answer your question very briefly, I was always very negative about cyber in Africa. I'm getting a little bit more positive and looking forward to some indications. You are more than welcome to contact me, get my email address, contact me, and we can take it up as neighboring countries. And I think we really need some help from champions in African countries to help us and the Cybersecurity Capacity Center of Southern Africa to really put down the footprint in Africa. So thanks a lot for that, and I'm looking forward to make contact with you.
Thank you, Bazi. I just put the link to the center in Cape Town into the chat for those who are interested in the work of the partner center in the Cybersecurity Capacity Center for Southern Africa. It's a long word, C3SA, into the chat. Are there any more questions? Yes, please.
Yes, can I?
Oh, sorry. John, I saw you first. So Ibrahim, you go first, and then John, please.
Thank you.
Ibrahim, do you want to ask a question?
Okay, in the interest of time, I see we basically have 2 minutes. Let me just have a go.
Yes, please.
To what extent does the review take into account the various peculiarities of countries in terms of their various stages of development on cybersecurity? I'm particularly keen on the standards segment or dimension of the study. You know, the cybersecurity is a concern to everyone, but in terms of standardization, there may be differences in protocols that are required for very secure networks as opposed to, you know, fairly open and not so very sensitive networks. So to what extent does the study take that into account? Sorry, I've not gone into it in detail if I ask a question that is already in the study. Go ahead. Thank you.
We are perhaps making an idea.
Yes, please go ahead, Ibrahim.
Do I have the mic? Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yes, and thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I am living in a country here. The political climate is very polarized, such that issues around cybersecurity are viewed by political opponents as threats against their own political activities. Just recently, we've just developed our cybersecurity bill that was taken to Parliament, and we have received quite a lot of challenges in actually, you know, passing it or getting people to understand that this is not a political issue. It is about human security all around the world. So I want to know what available opportunities are there on your side to support countries that are in conditions of this nature to be able to convince the other side to understand that it is a national security issue. It is not about actually targeting others.
Thank you very much. Would like to answer the first question, Michael, about the standards, in particular the challenge for developing countries.
We have perhaps naively assumed that highly sensitive and secure organizations will be investing substantially in the right things, whether they are international standards or something homegrown but well tested. So really the standards dimension is looking at the use of standards more widely in the population, in industry, and so on. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think what I picked up from what you're asking.
Can I add to that, Michael?
Sure.
I mean, the reason why we put a lot more emphasis on risk assessment in dimension 1 is precisely because of the point that you raise. In other words, not all countries are in the same situation. And what matters is that the actions being taken are proportionate to the risks that that country faces and recognize some of the resource constraints as well. So rather than saying there is one right way to do cybersecurity at the national level, it's a matter of what processes do you use to to establish what is right for you, and do you understand the consequences of the decisions that you make from a risk reduction point of view. So it's about the process without necessarily being too prescriptive about what the right answer is.
Thank you, Jamie. Michael.
I wondered if I should take Ibrahim's.
I saw Bill, you wanted to reflect on this question? Yeah, please go ahead.
Maybe Jamie, please add on to me, but Abraham's question, I'd like to, obviously, fake news, misinformation is being used politically around the world. I mean, everyone's being accused of the other party is fake news or what have you. So it is having some collateral damage on the whole issue of cybersecurity itself. I think one thing you'd find helpful is that our analysis of now close to over 80 countries, where we can actually look at the impact of maturity in cybersecurity on the use of the internet and its economic value. And here we find really strong findings that even controlling for the wealth of the country, the scale of internet use, how central internet use is to the country, the proportion of people online and so forth. Controlling for those factors, there's still a strong relationship between maturity levels of cybersecurity capacity building and the use of the internet in business, in government, and in the household. So that there's some good, reliable and accountable and transparent data to support the value of investing in capacity building.
Thank you, Bill. I'm aware that we are also a bit over time, but I would like to allow Musa Yalo to ask a question. Please
So
go ahead.
can I very quickly take up Bill's offer to add to his answer to Ibrahim?
Yes. Yeah. So, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. In Sierra Leone, we use the 2016 Cybersecurity Capacity Maturity Model to develop our cybersecurity policy and strategy. And this policy and strategy was adopted by the cabinet just a couple of weeks ago. So how can we realign our cybersecurity policy and strategy to the 2021 Cybersecurity Capacity Maturity Model? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Musa. Before I let my colleagues answer the question, Jamie wanted to add something to the previous one. Jamie?
Oh yeah, well, it was just in reflection to the political difficulty, if you like, of getting broad acceptance to cybersecurity measures. And I think part of Bill's point was that that one needs to avoid the temptation of stretching the definition so far that it's going to be provocative. But on a more positive note, I think the answer is to engage as much as possible, including engaging civil society in understanding what the issues and why the new laws are appropriate. And there is some guidance on how to effectively engage civil society in the development of cybersecurity strategy, which Global Partners Digital have produced. So I highly recommend that as a must read. And we had a seminar on this a few weeks ago, I think, which I expect the outcome is available somewhere.
Thank you, Jamie. Yes, the outcome will also be available on our website in a couple of weeks. But now there was a really important question from Musa regarding the comparability of the assessment based on the 2016 edition of the CMM and the new edition. Michael, would you like to answer? Or sorry, Sadie. Sadie, go ahead, please.
Yeah, brilliant question. The good news is, of course, we understand how to map between the two. Very much of these changes are actually small movements and making more precise some of the definitions so we understand what we're collecting and aligning it to the aspects in a way that partners around the world find intuitive and can understand directly. In some cases, there may be a few data points that you won't have historically collected, but we understand that mapping very directly. And what I would suggest is just get in touch directly with us and we can talk you through that. So, but it isn't dramatically bad news. There may be some new areas that you might want to focus on that historically perhaps didn't come to the fore. in the previous model, but other than that, there's very clear mappings between the two, and we can help you understand that.
Thank you, Sadie. I take one last question, which was in the chat from Ian Wallace. The question to the panel is, what is the current state of the GCSEC thinking on comparing cyber maturity assessments with cyber outcomes? In other words, what scope is there to move toward use of quantitative metrics to assess the validity, impact, and what matters from the various elements of the CMM?
I think we volunteer Bill for that one.
Absolutely.
Well, we can send you a couple of papers and links to papers that we're working on. That's exactly one of the key questions that does cyber capacity building matter? And the short answer is yes, it does. We've got some very positive evidence in that regard, and we're still trying to hone and refine that and adding more countries to our sample each day when we get more reviews. So Carolyn will help me make sure we get your email so that we can send that to you. And I think it's listed also perhaps in, I don't know where it's listed. It's listed everywhere, I think, but I'll try to send it to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just put in the chat, our website is basically the place to go, also regarding our papers, regarding the recordings. And we hope it's fully functional again in a couple of days, so please watch the space. Is there any other question in the, I don't see any other, Eva, did I miss any question in the chat? I don't think so.
Oh, I think it was all.
Yeah, okay. Patrick, I see there's an old hand, raised hand. Right, okay. Thank you so much. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us individually or to the chairs or to us if you don't know who to contact. We're very happy to talk to you afterwards and answer questions. The question of if a CMM was done in Kenya, no, not yet. We would be very happy to do that. We have been engaging with the Kenyan stakeholders for a while, and we would be very happy to do that, or with our partner in Cape Town. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to my colleagues at chairs. Thank you for everyone in the background. We have a team in the background working on the different issues which come up and happen during a webinar. Thank you to everyone, Liz, Philippa, Eva, Sadie, Michael, Jamie, Bill, Bazi, etc. And yeah, see you soon. Bye-bye.